Hello, everyone. I'm Jim Garrison, and I want to welcome you to day 306 of Humanity Rising. We resumed our scheduling after taking the month of August off for reflection and preparation for our fall program. We started on Wednesday by calling attention to the fact that the recent report of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change is saying that the situation in terms of ecological turbulence due to global warming is so severe that we territory, which the Secretary General says is code red for humanity. And then yesterday we talked with Ken Wilber, the great integral philosopher, for an integral view of our current situation, which was a masterful presentation of the complexities of our world and the inability that we currently experience about moving forward, given the rigidity of the ideologies from our past that still hold sway. Today, we're going to drill down into the sacrifices that have been wrought in human lives. And in this case, with children on the altar of ideology. And we're going to look at something that's emerged out of the recent news out of Canada, and the discovery of mass graves of young Native American children, First Nations children, as they're called in Canada, some as young as 3 years old, who had been separated from their families by the Canadian government and the Catholic Church, the Christian missionaries, to be re-educated, and were in some cases killed en masse. This is a practice that we're now understanding was not isolated and was a practice that we'll discuss as happened also in the United States. But it's also a phenomenon worldwide, as the European colonizers went around the world and literally decimated indigenous cultures in a voracious and rapacious way. So we want to honor those children today who've been essentially forgotten except by the First Nations peoples, and call to our attention the challenges of eliminating the ideologies of slavery in our minds, codified in our major religions, that have called upon the vulnerable and the innocent to be sacrificed. And we're going to have with us today Chief Phil Lane of the Dakota and Chickasaw Nation, who was actually born in one of those schools, the Haskell schools. And he's going to share with us, after an opening blessing, his experience and perspective on what has happened. And then we're going to turn to Daniel Sheehan, who you've heard before on Humanity Rising with Phil, who, among many other things, is also the director of the Lakota project that has been working with the Lakota Native Americans in South Dakota for many, many years, and will share his perspective as a constitutional litigator on how he's been working to protect the children in the Lakota Nation from these kinds of activities. So this will be a sober session on Humanity Rising as we remember the decimation of our young Native peoples. So thank you all for joining. And I now welcome you, Phil, to give us our opening blessing and then a presentation of what has happened.
Yes, my dear, I thank you, my brother Jim, for your compassion and love and sense of justice to bring this issue before the people. So wonderful to have Brother Daniel Sheehan here, who gave our people there, my Hanktawa people are my relatives there. My father was born in Wallace, South Dakota, and the good work they've done in supporting the Standing Rock people and the whole Achatishicoan. So I'm here at this time, just a few miles from the Kamloops Indian Residential School, where the first hundreds of children were uncovered. Now we're up to about 3,000. And yeah, I was born, as I shared it, Brother Jim shared, at the Haskell Indian Institute, Haskell Indian School, where my mother and father met and attended a school there. And in fact, they fell in love there, but of course you couldn't even kind of hold hands or anything, look at a girl there. But 10 years later, in our old way, because when we come to marry, we don't, the men give the dowry. We're the ones. So my dad couldn't have horses, so he went and struggled through 5 years at Oregon State University to get a degree. It took him 5 years rather than 4 because of the terrible education in Haskell. And he saved $2,000. And in 1943, during the war, he left he had a little time off and came and mom and said, I've come to claim what's mine. And so that's where my experience happened there at Haskell Indian School. I'd like to say a prayer now, especially remembering all these relatives right here, my beloved shoe shop relatives, and across, by the way, this happened across Canada. It's like almost the same author wrote the treatment of the Indigenous children across Canada and into the United States, particularly in any kind of church-run schools. The government schools were really rough. There was the Catholic schools, like St. Marty's there at the Yankton Sioux Reservation. So I'm going to say a little prayer now. O Tenkashla Wakantaka, Creator of the universe, most beloved one, all powerful one, most kind one, most compassionate one, ever forgiving one. O Ancient of Days, O Healer of hurts, we call upon your holy power this day. With all our generations, past, present, and future, here, closer than our closest vein, with us. All these beautiful children who have passed the spiritual world are in great joy and happiness today, that our remembrance and prayers, and they can see we are awakening to what's happened as prophesied. Nikashla Wakantaka, give thanksgiving to all the sacred teachers of all peoples on Mother Earth that taught kindness, compassion, forgiveness, gentleness, kindness. Nikashla Wakantaka. We call upon all the tribes and nations of the East, from where comes a red sunrise, to come together in unity and harmony and completely eliminate from the face of Mother Earth the abuse of children, the abuse of any human being. For a soul, it has no ethnicity, has no sex, no gender. It's a reflection of the oneness of our Creator. And Kashla Wakantaka, Creator of the universe, we call upon all those tribes in the East, from where comes the red sunrise. To come together in unity and harmony. Let us have a new sunrise upon this Mother Earth, as prophesied, as this new global civilization arises everywhere all at once. In Kashla Wakantaka, we give thanksgiving to all the tribes beneath the south, from where comes new life. We ask that new life, that springtime, might arise in our hearts and souls on humanity rising. As we know, by 2030, we don't know what's going to happen, but the end of war will all happen by then. The nation states will come together. So we pray for that. This horrendous killing of other members of our human family. In Kashla Wakantaka, we call upon all those tribes and nations of the West, from where comes thunder, lightning, and rain. And that thunder, lightning, and rain might awaken our hearts and minds to the spirituality that each one of us is a sovereignty, ancient, imperishable, and everlasting. Wakanta, God, creator of the universe, we call upon all those tribes and nations of the north, from where comes the white snow. Those purifying north winds might purify our hearts and minds, so it all remains as our connection with our beloved creator, free and detached from this transitory world. And while we walk here, we walk with the creator. We give you thanksgiving for all the powers of Father Sky. We especially give thanksgiving for our grandfathers and our fathers and our uncles and our cousins and our children, grandchildren, all our relatives. Especially, Creator, I ask you forgiveness, especially for my generation upon this Mother Earth. For we, as men, and our decisions have brought us to this point of runaway climate change that's beginning and will shake the earth, among other things. Nikashla, we humble ourselves before our beloved Mother Earth this time. Our beloved Mother, in which women are her representative, the foundation of life. And we asked with all our heart and soul that the abuse of women is so rampant in our Indigenous communities and everywhere in the world will end forever. We also acknowledge that all the incest and the rape, gang rape, things happening in our own communities, Indigenous communities, we know exactly the source from where it came. For that was not our way. To abuse children, to murder children, to burn children, as we'll soon explore. At the same time, Creator, we give you thanksgiving for all that has come in our path, for we know there is no death, just a change of worlds. And everything that comes to us comes for our own perfecting. And we have been coming back, and we're growing stronger and stronger and rising across the Americas and around the world with those relatives, the human family that understand these things, while the other systems collapse as prophesied. So we give you thanksgiving again, Creator, for all things. And I was going to say this little prayer of unity, to unify. And I've recognized the prior unity and oneness of our human family. Oh my God, unite the hearts of thy servants and reveal unto them thy great purpose. May they follow in thy commandments and abide in thy law. Help them, O God, in their endeavor, and grant them strength to serve thee. O God, leave them not to themselves, but guide their steps with the light of knowledge and cheer their hearts by thy love. Oh. Shunkmano hemeado, chinupasapa hemeado. How? My names are Chinupasapa and Shunkmano, and I stand responsible for my words and my actions. What I want to share with you are the patterns, literally, whether it was Catholic, whether it was Anglican, United Church of Christ, Presbyterian, whatever the churches were, these are the patterns of abuse that our children, your children of the human family experienced. And I'll add as we go along. So if you'd be so kind there, Brother Richard, to put that slide presentation up at this time. Okay, perfect. Next slide, please. These patterns of abuse throughout Canada, and in Canada, they were all operated by Christian churches, every one of them. In the United States, you had both federally government-run schools, which were very, very harsh, like Carlisle Haskell Indian School, where I was born, where my mother and father attended school. But all the Christian Indian residential schools across the country were no different than what happened in Canada. These were researched and documented by the Four Worlds International Institutes and other Indigenous research groups in Canada and the United States, include the following: physical abuse, sexual assault, including forced sexual intercourse between men and women in authority and girls and boys in their charge. Forced oral, genital, or masturbatory contact between men and women in authority and girls and boys in their charge. Please, next. Sexual touching by men or women in authority of girls and boys in their charge. Performing private, false, pseudo-official inspections of the genitalia of girls and boys, children, or 50 boys taking a shower naked while the nuns stand there and take pictures of them. Embarrassing, shaming, completely in violation of our Indigenous culture. Arranging or reducing abortions in female children impregnated by priests and men in authority. And this happened more times than anybody understands. Plus, Paul, go back to the last one just for a moment. I had the opportunity, the great, I should say, privilege of working with thousands upon thousands and thousands of children who become older relatives across Canada and the United States when we did the film Healing the Hurts, which opened this whole issue up. When we actually filmed it, and if anybody who's wished to see that, I'll put a link into the chat. But one situation I want us to bring to note that I heard a number of times: a young girl working down in the bakery downstairs where they had a furnace. And here comes a group of nuns. They have a newborn baby all dressed up. Then she looks over and she sees them open up that furnace and throw that little baby inside that furnace. And all she could hear was, "Ee!" for a moment, as that little baby burned like that. Next slide, please. Sticking needles through the tongues of children, often leaving them in place for extended periods of time, especially for speaking your language, as well as they would take terrible detergents and things that burn the mouth, have the children drink that or put it in their mouth for speaking their own Indigenous tongue. Inserting needles into other regions of children's anatomy, burning or scalding children. I've seen the wounds. Can you imagine? Punish a child by pouring boiling water on their arms. They carry that scar all their life. Beating children to unconsciousness, and this happened every one of these schools. Literally, beating children to the point of drawing blood. That's one. Beating children to the point of inflicting serious, permanent, or semi-permanent injuries, including broken arms, broken legs, broken ribs, fractured skulls, shattered eardrums, and the like. I have met so many of my relatives, and I call the human family my relatives, my Indigenous relatives, here we talk about, at the time we're using the term Aboriginal, who can still not hear from being hit and slapped and have their ears pulled. And using electrical shock devices on physically restrained children. Literally, in some of these schools, they literally had an electric chair in the basement. They take those poor children and put them down there and just shock them. Forcing sick children to eat their own vomit. And you'll see that in Healing the Hurts. Brought in some kind of a thing. We had these doggone cereals. They were so old, they'd have maggots in them. So it's my dear sister from Alkali Lake, Dog Creek. She ate some of that, threw it up. They made her eat it again. Next. Unprotected exposure is punishment to the natural elements. Snow, rain, and darkness occasionally prolong the point of producing life-threatening conditions. Frostbite, pneumonia. In fact, my beloved wife, we're no longer together because the incredible pain and hurt of I was a survivor of my parents. I mean, she was a survivor of residential school. Literally, her little friends were underneath the bed, speaking Blackfoot, telling a little story. So they put them out in Alberta now. This was at the St. Paul's Residential School. They put her out in freezing weather and made her kneel on the steel fire escape and forgot her out there. She was so frightened, so terrified, she couldn't move. She almost froze to death out there. Withholding medical attention from individuals suffering the effect of physical abuse because they wanted to cover it up, let the children suffer. Shaving the children's heads as punishment. And of course, as you know, when you came to these schools, like a concentration camp, here's these children coming with their traditional clothing, braids, long hair. They shave their heads, including girls. In one situation at the St. Mary's School, I heard, which, by the way, that's a very interesting, I'll talk about that. Let me just pause for a minute here, how this works and how it's continuing to work. There was a man there named Jerry Dawson. In fact, they had a whole building, gymnasium, athletic center dedicated to his name. And when I first came to Lethbridge, I was a professor at the University of Lethbridge, I heard about Jerry Dawson's boys, but I didn't understand really what was going on. So what happened was Jerry Dawson was truly a sexual predator. And so he sexually abused the boys and then encouraged them to sexually abuse the other boys. And you have entire leadership, even their legal counsel at one time, their head chief still was a primary abuser. And so to cover up their abuse, what do? They hire those that they abuse. And this goes on because they do not want this to be uncovered. I remember we started having healing workshops when I first arrived at the University of Lethbridge. And then the Women Society, some of them who were sexually abusing other girls or beating them up. You know, if you spoke your language, these girls who had gotten caught up in the Catholic Church or the Episcopal Church would take these children and attack them in the middle of the night and take them and put them in a blanket and bang them all over the place. So, you know, this is a real deal happening as we speak. The sexual abuse, gang rape, all the things, the abuse of elders coming directly from this. Withholding medical attention from the individuals, of course, I said that, suffering with the effect of physical abuse. Next one, please. Psychological, emotional abuse. Now, this is just physical to children as young as 3 years old. And it went on till at least 15 when they went home. And some of them, not even some, I was right here speaking to, we know at least 6,000 of these children or more did not come home. In fact, I was just talking to a dear sister here, a little Shuswap, and her granny's child never came back. No explanation, just didn't return. So, administration of beatings to naked or partially naked children before their fellow students and or institutional officials. And of course, when you're terrified, you wet your bed. What was your punishment? You had to take that bed of your urine and put it on and then walk around in front of the other children. When you're terrified, you wet your pants Instead, they just shamed them for what they gave them, the fear. Public, individually directed verbal abuse, belittling and threatening. They wanted to shame you in front of your relatives, shame you, get the relatives also shaming you. Racism to the highest degree. Duncan Campbell Scott, the longest Minister of Indian Affairs in Canada, more than 20 years during the height of this, which began in the late 1800s, said this. He said, did I say Indian problem? In 2 generations, there will be no Indian problem because there will be no more Indians. Now, that's the attitude in the United States and Canada. What school, remember, lice make nits, kill the children, or take them away from their evil, evil ways. And then we're just taught that maybe you made a mistake by behavior, but you human being, you're evil. You come from Satan. Your ceremonies are from Satan. Sun dances, sweat lodges, every ceremony, unless it was in the Catholic Church, given in Latin, or the Anglican Episcopal Church, of course, was given in English, which was good because they translated everything in the Lakota language. So I'm not saying that every single thing happened, because we know that everything that comes to us comes for our own perfecting. And we are now rising like never before, and these children empowering us to rise and fulfill the sacred prophecy that said we shall become so illumined, we shall enlighten the world. But that does not come. It comes from facing our difficulties and facing the hurt and pain. That's what we need to do, each one of us as human being, till we understand the oneness, the prior unity and oneness of the human family. The hurt of one is the hurt of all. Performing public strip searches and gentle inspections of children. Can you imagine how you'd feel? Pull down your pants, pull down your dress in front of the other girls and other boys, and examine your genitalia. For what? Next. The forced removal of children from their homes and families. You can imagine your most beloved children, 3 years old, 4 years old, 5 years old, RCP arrives. Government officials arrive and take your children away. And if you allow them to go, won't allow them to go, you'll be put in jail. That's how it was, particularly here in Canada. Withholding, I already talked about cutting children's hair, shaving their heads as policy. It's policy. Can you imagine as policy when they came into schools? Withholding presents, letters, and other personal property of children. In fact, as these schools, the St. Paul's schools, you could find they hid these presents and letters from their parents to cut them off. They could live 3 miles away and not allow their children to be seen by their children. And in those, by the way, in that school, they found the skeletons of babies in those walls put in there. Locking children in closets, sometimes for extended periods of time, like 3 or 4 days. Days. No food, no water. Next, please. Of course, we came there with our sisters, our cousins, our closest relatives, in which we so love and care for. They separated us so we couldn't even speak to each other, destroying the very basic foundation of our strength, and that is our kinship system. But, it's coming back. Eliminating any avenue by which to bring grievances, inform parents, or notify external authorities of abuses. They cut it off. They cut it off. Forced labor. They receive the money from the government, these churches. And they forced these children to do the work so they could get as much money as possible. Long-term isolated confinement. Long-term. In fact, a lot of times when these children would be sick or whatever, they just put them in a room and let them die. Oh, what happened? Oh, they ran away. Next slide, please. Starvation. And I mean, first of all, as we can see, that wasn't just starvation. These schools had inadequate nutrition levels below what that is needed for normal growth and subsistence. The children were always hungry, always hungry. It's one thing I heard across Canada, the United States. School, many thousands of children. I work children, adults now, hungry all the time, hungry. Some of them went outside and ate grass. Exploited child labor and get paid for this. It'd work them from night till day. And boy, tell you what, those officials came, they always knew. You know how they knew? Because they'd serve them good, decent food. They give them some decent clothes to wear. That's when the officials came. Forced labor under unsafe working conditions. Many were injured, never compensated. Inadequate medical services, sometimes leading to death. Because, of course, they wouldn't call the medical authorities in when they abused and beat these children up until they're at the last minute, maybe. And there was, by the way, in these schools, there was those that were compassionate, tried to speak out. They were eliminated. I know many cases you showed any compassion whatsoever. These children, you were gone. So it wasn't all. But I'm sharing, whether you were good or not good, this is what you were witnessing inside those schools. Of course, the government wasn't responsive. Next one, please. Church in action. This was brought before the churches. None of them paid any attention. None of them listened. In fact, they moved the sexual abusers, these priests, from one place to another, knowing full well they were predators. Failure to bring local incidents of abuse to the attention of higher church authorities. Well, now we know, of course, they did. But the whole works right in the Vatican. Right in the Vatican. Sylvia Dimmer's probably the greatest trial attorney in the United States. We worked on trying to get in the United States, and so she has the most complete files of these bishops and those that sexually abuse. You can see the whole story. He's covered it up. Failure to bring local incident of abuse to the attention of federal and appropriate provincial government authorities. Failure to protect children under their care from sexual predators and the physical and emotional abuse of older children also attending residential school. This is that Jerry Dawson. I mean, there's many like him. Can you imagine? To cover it up, they named their whole athletic system dedicated to Jerry Dawson. Of course, now when this came out, all of a sudden, his name disappears. No mention is made ever again. But those that were doing this and continue it, the Creator is the most just. Next, please. Failure to remove known sex offenders from positions of supervision and control of children, and this has happened all over. Dallas, Texas. You know the case there. All the altar boys. So, and it's still coming out. Our relatives in Ireland, treatment. It was right there in the papal bulls, right there giving permission to enslave, to kill, to take every one of our territories, which gave then the Christian right, which resulted in discovery, doctrine of discovery. And of course, we know where that came from. And from that resulted in acquiescence to federal funding levels below those the churches themselves believe necessary for operation. And then, of course, they'd always get their cut. Starvation as a cost-cutting measure. Can you imagine? To make sure you save money with all that money in the Vatican, All that money in England, in the Anglican Church, United Church of Christ, the Presbyterian Church, all that money protected by the government, no taxes, and yet they couldn't even contribute a little bit of resource. Neglect of their educational mandate. Next, please. Failure to adequately inspect or otherwise maintain effective supervision of institutions to which their legal wards have been placed. Failure to fund church schools at levels sufficient for maintaining the physical health of their legal wards. Failure, and this, by the way, my uncle Vine Delorius, I remember what he told me when I was a young man, Vine Delorius Jr. He said, nephew, Doshka, he said, you know, they made over 300 treaties with us. 300. Of course, in Canada, they even made more. And they broke every single promise except one. They promised to take our land, and they did. Next one, please. Collaboration with church officials. They collaborated with. That's why the government of Canada, they knew that would be revealed. That's why they took all responsibility of paying for this from the churches. Unbelievable. But I have to say, the Anglican Church of Canada now is stepping in, doing their best to support Indigenous people. In fact, every church in Canada that participated in this in the United States should have a very active program. I think the Episcopal Church, the National Cathedral, you should focus on what happened here in these places. Removal or recollocation of internal personnel critical of residential school conditions. So if you spoke up, and there was those, you just simply be removed. Next. Good. We're at the end. So, my beloved relatives of the human family, sometimes in our healing, we have to look directly in our soul. And please understand, our Indigenous people, I think you'd feel the same way. If I came and destroyed your children, destroyed your culture, or tried to, no way you can destroy that which is eternal, because it's based on a spiritual foundation, on spiritual principles. And we are stronger now than we've ever been before. Can you imagine, after they did all that, and come to you and say, oh, please forgive us. Let's have reconciliation. There can be no reconciliation until there's restoration. Restoration. And I'll tell you, the coffers of the Vatican, the Church of England, and all the royal families of Europe are filled with the monies, the gold and silver, all the other rich resources they took to the Americas. Well, those coffers need to be opened up. And I guarantee you, in time, as the people understand the treatment by those that call themselves kings and queens and bishops and holier than thou, parading around in sacred garments. It's a, you know, I'm going to say this too. This has nothing to do with the beloved teachings of Jesus Christ. It has nothing to do with that. In fact, he said, you know, those that do these kind of things in my name, accursed may they be. This has nothing to do with the sacred teachings of Jesus. I want to be real clear about that, because, you know, when our relatives were forced by treaty to become Christians, they were the greatest Christians upon Mother Earth. Clear on the Standing Rock Reservation, right after Wounded Knee, donations were going to people of China, to the San Francisco earthquake survivors, and other places during World War I. When it came time for World War I, after they'd killed our people, every single member of the Standing Rock Reservation was a member of the Red Cross, every single one. every young man in the entire Oceti and across this country during World War I, when we weren't even citizens, because we honor our agreements, stood up and went to fight for this land. I remember I received my name from my grandfather, Chantewa Stay, strong heart, up in Wakpala. You know, one of his eyes was gassed from the Germans. You know, they served. They were the original code talkers, by the way. Because, of course, what happened was after World War I, they sent German relatives here, and they learned our language, but they didn't know the Navajo's language. So I want to say this at the same time, and to share this part, conclude this part, because you have this wonderful attorney here, and I get a chance to take a look at this. I'm going to put some more things in the link for you. But all this was long prophesied. It was prophesied by the Hopis, by the prophets of the reunion, the condor, the quetzal, and the eagle. This great winter time would come. It would last for 500 years, a spiritual winter time. But how do you know what that is? How do you know what lies are when you live in truth? How do you know what abuse of elders is when you love and respect your elders? How do you know how people could come and with a bayonet or rip out a mother's fetus and stick it over the end of a bayonet like they did at Sand Creek and so many places? Who would know such a wintertime would come? But we knew it came. And we had things that were given to us. Sacred prophecy among the Hanktawas, the White Swan Dakotas, that a white buffalo would appear. And if we were able, it gave itself to us, slay it. The whole story behind that. We would live to see this day. And we are here now. And thank you so much, Humanity Rising. Thank you, Ubiquity University. Thank you, Brother Jim Garrison, who has the courage to bring it all on the table in a good way. And I want to say, too, the Creator is the ever forgiving, because going around in shame, oh, I'm so ashamed, that's not going to help us. Change. If you feel shame, then change. If you feel guilt, change and do something about it. And so, Mitakiapi, my beloved relatives, I don't mean to be kind of strong on this today. There's some things, though, if you can feel them, you can heal them. You can talk about them. You share your cheers about them, and your rage about them. You can understand them and heal them too. Howlimi chante washtelo, shumkmano he meado, chinupasapa he meado, howlimi chante washte. You know, at the end of our Dakota, when we speak, we say our names. Shunkmano, I was given by my grandfather, Chante Washte, Strongheart, Walter Strongheart, Standing Rock, and my name, Chinupasapa, Black Pipe. The other one means horse thief, or in the long form, it means the leader of warriors who takes the enemy's best horses. And my beloved grandfather, Frank White Buffalo Man, from the other side of Standing Rock on the Sitting Bull side, gave me the name Chinupasapa, Black Pipe, or sacred black pipe born of thunder, lightning, and rain. And I stand responsible before our Creator for all my words and actions. Any questions? I'm right here. But that's what that means. We have to be responsible for our own actions. And Mitakiepi, we as men especially around this world, the way we treat women and those in any way, shape, or form who've committed any of this. Remember, this is passed to us. Let's stop this intergenerational trauma and the lateral violence that we're doing to our own selves. Because I say always to my relatives, my beloved Indigenous relatives, our greatest challenge is our own disunity caused by our hurt and shame. It's time to leave it behind. Because in our unity and understanding also, all those beloved members of the human family that wish and want so much like Brother Jim, Daniel Sheehan, and so many others I've met, they want to support us. So as we heal ourselves, we will have a spiritual I don't use the term army, but a spiritual circle that will transform this very Mother Earth as prophesied. Thank you.
Bill, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, brother. Hear those crows? They're all they're all singing out here.
I can imagine. I can imagine. Very profound, and it's something we all have to take in, everyone. The gravity and offered in explicit detail of what thousands and thousands of young Native peoples suffered, and especially the young people. So thank you, Phil. We're going to now hear from Dan Sheehan, who has been working with the Lakota Sioux for many, many years. And then there's an extraordinary woman that's been recounting some of her experiences in the chat, Natalya Weaselhead. So that when you're finished, Danny, I think we'll have Natalya up just to share her personal specific experience, just so everybody knows the agenda. And then if we have any time beyond that, we'll have a discussion between the three of you. So thank you, everyone. Danny, please.
Great. Thank you, Phil. Thank you, Jim. Look, the critical thing to keep in mind here is that this is still going on. I mean, it's a lot of white people, especially, love to reminisce and feel bad about what their ancestors did. And then at the same time, they say, well, but we didn't do it. So you can't really expect us to have to sacrifice. All this talk of reparations, and they get terribly upset about that and say that, look, if I were alive back then, I wouldn't have done anything like that. And I would have gone out of my way to stop that from happening. That's just not true, because they don't do anything about it now. I mean, the fact of the matter is that in South Dakota, they've been taking over 500 children a year and up to 700 children a year away from their parents. And that's the Department of Social Services. Now, they swoop in with the police that if they have people in the housing project, for example, in Rapid City, South Dakota, if any of the Native people in the housing projects there are having a barbecue on a Friday night, white people will find out and call the police, the white police, and they'll come swooping in, and they bring breathalyzers with them because they're being told, well, these people are having a barbecue and I think they're drinking beer there. And the police will swoop in and bring breathalyzers and start administering breathalyzer tests to all the women. And if any of the women are found to have alcohol in their system to any degree at all, what they do is the police go looking for their children and seize their children, arrest the women and charge them with neglect, and take children into the Department of Social Services. The mothers are put in jail, and then the white authorities call an emergency hearing within 48 hours and bring them in front of a white magistrate who, in the white public defenders are assigned to the case. And they immediately say, well, look, we're going to waive any kind of an objection to what the Department of Social Services is doing. And they're going to order the mother to have to attend anger management classes, alcohol classes, job training classes, et cetera. And if they miss over a 90-day period, if they miss more than 2 of those numerous meetings they impose upon them, they then take the child permanently and remove the child from the custody of the mother and put them into the all white foster care system. And there's an entire structure still operational there in the Dakotas and throughout the country against Native American children. And the entire Association of American Adoption Attorneys prey upon the Native children, the Lakota children especially, that we know about, taking them and getting over $100,000 a piece for these children to be sold basically into white families, some of them sex abusers, and the entire structure is functioning that way. That we worked with the American Civil Liberties Union to help bring a legal cause of action against this up in South Dakota. Even one good federal judge appointed by Obama ruled against the Department of Social Services for this kind of conduct. And his ruling was reversed by the Eighth Circuit Court of Appeals. And they allowed them to reinstate that protocol of these 48-hour emergency hearings that under the Indian Child Welfare Act are not to be administered in a normal course. It's important to remember the structural sources of all of this sin, as they call it. But the reality is, people go, "Oh, look, it's too bad that they took some of the land away from the people, but they've given them reservations." And people don't realize, white people don't realize, they restricted the Native people to the poorest part of their entire Aboriginal territories, and took the rest of it. And even in the limited amount of territory that they allowed the people to remain on, the federal government under the Dawes Act in 1887 took away half of all that land and put it into a trust that the Department of Interior would then administer. And what they did is they leased it out to white ranchers, to white cattle barons, to oil drilling, mining corporations, et cetera, and took the money in exchange for it. And what they were using a portion of the money to pay for the goods and services which they were required by treaty to provide to the people in any event. I mean, I remember when I was co-counsel for the Native American Rights Committee for ACLU National, that I was at the occupation at Wounded Knee. I was asked to come in to provide additional counsel to the American Indian movement during that occupation back in 1973. And I remember I was in the office in Boulder, Colorado of the ACLU Rocky Mountain Regional to do a legal brief for the Native American Rights Committee for ACLU National to the United States Supreme Court in the case that had to do with it's Mancari versus the Mancari case that actually was. We were writing a brief to establish the right of the Bureau of Indian Affairs, the Federal Bureau of Indian Affairs, to engage in, quote, what they call discriminatory hiring on behalf of Native American people to try to get more and more people in the Bureau of Indian Affairs who were actually Native American people. And it was like 2:00 in the morning, and I was working away at this brief, and I took this slight break and I looked up on the wall and I noticed this great big huge map that we had there at the Rocky Mountain Regional of ACLU. And there were these big, huge green areas in the map of the United States. And I was kind of curious about it. I said, look at those big green spots, and each one of them had like a little tiny dot of yellow on them. And I got up and turned all the lights up and went over to look at this. And it turns out that every one of these big green areas were either national parklands, national grasslands, national wetlands, forest preserves. So all federal property. In the little yellow spot down in the little tiny corner of this thing, it was an Indian reservation. And it turns out that that's where they had imprisoned the Native people that were indigenous to that area of land, and had put all the reservations were originally prisons And they had, the native people had to wear a card around their neck with a rope on it. And that if they were found off the reservation, literally off the reservation, they could be killed by any white person. And that was an entire federal government policy. And to this day, people get up at the Congress every single morning, go into the Congress, and they are actively holding away from the native people those lands that are national parks and national wetlands, national grasslands, national reserves, wildlife preserves. And that's all land that has been taken away from the native people and is being held away from the native people by federal law every single day, right now, to this point. And the children are being taken away under the auspices of the Social Services Department, accusing the parents of neglect. Parents who have been compelled to live in the poorest areas of the whole country. Of the 3,300 counties in the entire United States, if you take the 10 poorest counties in the entire United States, 7 of those 10 counties are on the Lakota reservations in South Dakota and North Dakota. And the fact is that 99.9% of all the white people don't have the slightest idea that that's true. Not because it isn't available to them, it's because they don't care. This is my major point to be made here, is that this account that Phil has given of this historical context of what it is that's happened is still going on. And white people don't care. They do not even bother to become familiar with this. I was completely guilty of the same thing. I mean, I grew up in northern New York, up north of Lake George, at the very edge of the Akwesasne, at the 6 Indian nations, originally the 5 Indian nations, and the Mohawk territory up there. I lived within 100 miles of that territory, and I didn't even realize it was there. I thought it was the Adirondack Forest Preserve or the Syracuse Forest Preserve from Syracuse University. There's an entire region of the upper northeast of the United States that has never been part of the United States ever. It's not treaty territory, it's not a reservation. It's in fact an entire region of the territory of the North America, Turtle Island, that has never been part of the United States. It's where the great white roots of peace they lived there, the people. They signed a treaty, one of the very few that's ever been respected at all. That was signed by Benjamin Franklin and Alexander Hamilton before the founding of the United States Articles of Confederation, in order to try to keep the native people from joining with the French in the French and Indian Wars up there. And this is also not known at all. It's not taught in the schools. The American people, the white European people don't even know about this, because they don't care. They're busy getting and spending, laying waste their power, commercial activities all the time, and they don't worry about this. Now, I was asked to come in during the occupation of Wounded Knee as a federal civil rights lawyer, as one of the co-founders of the Harvard Civil Rights Law Review, to go in to make the argument there. I helped participate in drafting the briefs that were used to dismiss ultimately all of the charges against the major leadership of the American Indian movement, Russell Means and Dennis Banks and Vernon and Clyde Belcourt and the other people, Madonna Thunderhawk. These are people that I came to know, and because of that, I became co-counsel for the Native American Rights Committee for ACLU National. That's how I became familiar with this, not because I was taught about any of it, but that's how when I ended up being legal counsel for the Jesuit National Headquarters in their National Social Ministry Office, we worked to make the Jesuit order return land to the native people. But there's so much structural sin built into the structures that have been set up, is that, that who do you return it to? You return it to the Tribal Council of the Indian Reorganization Act of 1934, which is a completely neo-colonial institution. Their constitutions were drafted by the United States government. There's an Article 11 in virtually every one of them that absolutely prohibits Native American people from ever making through that bureau, that Indian Reorganization Act established tribal council. They are expressly prohibited from ever bringing any kind of cause of action to recover any land or territory taken from them by the United States government, no matter how unlawfully. That as an institution, the Native American Council is not allowed to bring any such action. All they can do is ask for money. And they've established an entire Indian Court of Claims, which is, they set up the express condition that no Native people can ever have standing to ever require the return of any land. And I referenced earlier that in the Dawes Act, when they, even for the limited areas of the reservations that the people were ordered to remain on as a prison, that half of that land was taken and put into public trust, allegedly, for the tribe. The other half were put into allotments, which were these 40 acres of land that were given to the headman of a particular family to try to literally, under the Indian Reorganization Act 1934, to get them to adopt capitalism and private ownership of land, to completely counter the communitarian collective understanding of the indigenous people, that they were stewards of that area and protectors of that area, and lived in harmony with the creatures in the water, in the mountains, in the land, in the grasslands. There was a conscious program designed, even in 1934, under the Roosevelt administration, the progressive administration, of imposing these restrictions on the people. They took away half of the land, put it into the Bureau of Indian Affairs. As I mentioned earlier, the Department of Interior leased the land out to white ranchers in mining, in oil exploration, in gold mining, in silver mining. And the monies that were collected for those leases went to the federal government. And the federal government kept billions and billions of dollars in, quote, trust, which they not only never had any accounting for, but they only gave a tiny portion of it back to the Native people in the form of paying for the provisions that they were required by the treaty to give them. They made the people pay for it themselves. And then they kept all the rest of the money, which was 95% of all the money. And even when a lawsuit was filed against them, the Cobell case by the Blackfoot tribe up in Montana, filed a major lawsuit against them. The Republican judge was so offended at what he discovered that the Department of Interior had been stealing all of that money for 100 years, had been stealing the money. And when the judge ordered the Department of Interior to have an accounting of that money, they said, oh, we can't possibly keep an accounting of that money because we never paid any attention to how much money we were stealing from the Native people. And so the judge established a class action to have a full accounting done. The W. Bush administration had him removed from the case. A Republican appointed judge had him removed from the case. And they appointed another judge that agreed to a settlement, which, catch this, they agreed to give the Native tribes only the amount of money that the Department of Interior said it would cost them to do an accounting, to figure out how much actual money was stolen from them. And the judge went ahead and approved that. The people got approximately 1%. The Native people got approximately 1% of the actual monies that had been stolen from them. And you have case after case after case like that. I mean, the reality is that the United States Supreme Court has cited, within 10 years ago, has cited the doctrine of discovery, and an opinion written by Ruth Bader Ginsburg, cited the doctrine of discovery as the rationale for not agreeing to allow any claims to be made to a return of any of the lands. Even and people are always complaining, the white people say, well, what are you going to do? Give them back the land? There's people that are all living there. The reality is that I pointed out a substantial portion of those lands, there isn't anybody living in there anyway. That they're all forest lands, grasslands, wetlands, all that, and they're still holding them away, just like the Black Hills. When the Native people finally, after years, decades of litigation, trying to reclaim the Black Hills, the most sacred place of the Lakota people, where in the wind caves that the indigenous people understand that the Lakota people came up out of the earth itself from the Pleiades, from a star system, came up out of the wind caves and populated the land. When they tried to reclaim that land for themselves, the United States Supreme Court, recognizing that it was an absolute atrocity, the taking of all of that land, an absolute and total violation of the Treaty of Fort Laramie, 1851 and 1868, that the total violation of the treaty. There wasn't the slightest rationale they had for legally doing this. And then the Supreme Court said, oh, but of course you can't get the land back. How much do you want for it? And the Lakota people, also the Chete said, we don't want any money for it. We want the land back. The Supreme Court said, no, that's not the way the rules go here. The rules are that you can't get the land back. So how much money do you want? And when they refused to take any of the money, the federal government put the money in trust, after printing it up on a printing press, and it doesn't represent anything, and they put it into a trust for them, and said, oh, well, look, we're going to treat it as though you took the money for it because it's in a trust, and we'll add interest each year, like whatever that means, right? But you can't have access to the land, your most sacred place. Now, so what I'm saying is that it's absolutely essential to understand that the wrongdoing that was performed, on the Native people from the very arrival of Columbus off North America, is still going on, and it's built into the structures. And now we got Deb Haaland, who is the head of the Department of Interior, a Native American person, and that what has to get done is these things need to be addressed. Now, of course, the Biden administration is going to say, well, wait a second, we're holding on by our fingernails here, in the 2022 elections that are just coming up in another year. We may lose our majority in the Senate. We may lose our 3-person majority in the House of Representatives. And so don't make us do too much. Don't try to make us do too much, because we'll offend all of the racists and the white people. And so if we're going to hold on, you guys have to cooperate with us. You Native people, don't ask for too much back. Let us in the Democratic Party get the privilege and esteem of having appointed a Native American person to head up the Department of Interior for the first time ever in the entire history of the United States. Let's us get the credit for that. But don't ask her to do too much. Don't ask her to act like a real Native American person, and ask these fundamental and profound questions. So as Phil has pointed out, there's been a long prophecy, not only among the Lakota people in the Ochate Sakoan, but in the Navajos and others, that there's going to come a time of reckoning, that because of the perfidy of the European culture, because of the intrinsic lies and structured sinfulness of the structures of the European people, their entire system is going to collapse because of their own wrongdoing, because of the allowing, facilitating actually, of a tiny 1/100th of 1% of their people to dominate and control and rape and pillage the natural environment by digging into the land and extracting all of the minerals and the metals to make war machines, so that they can make war on the rest of the world to get access to the other resources, mainly of the Aboriginal people. That type of undertaking, fueled by petroleum and extracting the lifeblood of the planet, and petroleum up out of the planet so that they can have combustion engines to forge the beauty of our planet into power, that they are going to collapse by dint of their own wrongdoing. And the indigenous people are going to just stand by and survive and persevere and remain. And when the entire structures of the white culture collapse by dint of their own continued sinfulness, that the indigenous people are going to re-arise and are going to be able to move again freely along the land and help resuscitate the planet and bring it back. This is a long and deep prophecy on the part of not only the Lakota people, but other indigenous tribes that can see into the future. And so while all the white people, we're working like mad here at our Romero Institute to try to stop global climate change, to do what we can. But we are thrashing away trying to get the attention of major legislators, and we're trying to do everything that we can do to stop the process of global climate change, because we know that the people who are going to suffer the consequences of the global climate change most egregiously are going to be the poor and the oppressed people of the world. The indigenous people, the Aboriginal people, are going to suffer. The droughts and the floods, and so people start getting really, oh, New York City subway system got flooded out. Oh, Faith in Bogota, somebody ought to do something about this. Oh, New Orleans and the white fisher people down there are getting flooded out. Oh, somebody ought to do something about that. Oh, the white people's homes are getting burnt down in California. Oh, maybe we better do something about this, but they don't. And so that those of us who have learned something from the indigenous people are working hard to try to stop this process, but we're running up against the same structures, the sinful structures of a society that is deeply enmeshed in a fundamental racism against the indigenous people. The members of the Caucasian race genuinely are taught and trained to believe that they are racially superior to the indigenous and Aboriginal people of the world. Chinese people think the same thing. They think they are the master race, and the people from India think the same thing, so that what we've got to do, as Phil was pointing out, is we have to transcend this type of racialist thinking. We've got to restructure the fundamental structures of the Western culture to get their boot up off the neck of the Aboriginal people. We need to learn the lessons of the Aboriginal people of living in harmony with the natural environment. This is going to call for major structural reform. And what I'm proposing is that one of the major avenues along which this can be undertaken is looking at the Green New Deal. The Green New Deal is a mechanism by means of which we can attack the wrongdoing, the structural wrongdoing that has been put in place by Western culture that are basically favoring transnational corporate capitalism, racism, etc. What we have to do is our office, the Romero Institute, is drafting a 350-page draft of the California Green New Deal. That's Green California. We're putting it to the state Senate. We're putting it to the state assembly. I'm working daily on identifying where those regions are in the state of California, where the legislators in the state assembly and the state Senate, we can garner their support for this. And we're going to try to establish in California a model of the Green New Deal that can be a model for the entire country. And it's going to be addressing a fundamental alteration of the economic structure. It's got to move from a supply side economic model of just having an economy that responds to what the products are that are being produced by the corporations, which are being foisted upon people through massive advertising and training them into believing that they have to have televisions that you can talk to change the channel, and electric toothbrushes, instead of providing for the needs of the people of the world, which is a demand side economic system that responds to the demands and the needs of the people of our planet. We still have 10 million people a year dying of starvation on the planet every year. We have hundreds of thousands of people, tens of hundreds of thousands of people dying of diseases that we've known the cure for over 100 years. And yet the system isn't responding to that because they don't view it as a real need. The need is to supply the corporations. So that we've got to have a fundamental alteration of this. The AOC and the other people that are in Congress right now, the new, more progressive people, that are understanding this. Bernie Sanders understands this. Elizabeth Warren understands this. What we've got to do is have an entire elevation of consciousness on the part of our people collectively to implement the kind of changes that need to be made in the face of what the white people even recognize now as a growing emergency, because they find themselves being threatened by global climate change. So they may be open to hearing some of this strictly from a point of view of self-interest. But we have to try to increase the conscientization, the raising of the consciousness of white people around the world, in our country, starting in the state of California. We're working in North Dakota and South Dakota. I mean, look at South Dakota. I mean, what are you talking about? I mean, the South Dakota and North Dakota have been completely taken over by the oil corporations up there, and the mining corporations, and the tiny. Well, I won't even go into it. But the bottom line is, what I'm saying is that we at the Romero Institute, that are the house of the Lakota People's Law Project, have learned something from the Native people. The white people are pretty stubborn, pretty pig-headed, and are only learning a little bit. But we're trying to translate what it is that we have come to know from working with and living among the indigenous people, to try to share this type of an insight. And we're trying to transform it into a complete comprehensive piece of legislation that can be implemented in the state of California, and that we can then have it serve as a model for other states around the country, and then for the whole country, and eventually for the world. But we have to listen to the Aboriginal people, because the failing to do this is going to just result in the massive collapse of the entire culture. And the Aboriginal people's prophecy is going to come true, that the meek will inherit the earth, and those who are powerful and strong shall fall. And this is a prophecy of all spiritual people that know this. And the indigenous people have been trying to tell people about this, have been trying to get people to understand that they have to change. And what Phil is saying is, look, don't just wring your hands and lament about the past, and don't just whine. We don't need your tears and sympathy. What we need is change. We need fundamental structural change that has to be undertaken in the white people and the church structures, Catholic Church, Jesuit order, the Society of Jesus, have got to repent, have got to pay for this, have got to learn to change the consciousness of all the people. They profess to have that be their mission. And as Phil has pointed out, the basic fundamental teachings of Jesus Christ and of the Buddha and the other genuinely spiritual beings have been telling us this for 10,000 years. 10,000 years, and here we now are at the very brink of totally destroying the climactic system of our planet. We have thermonuclear weapons to potentially threaten the entire world with destruction. We have 415 private nuclear power reactors, 115 of which are all located right on the seashores of our oceans. We can see Fukushima, what the results are going to be of these kind of nuclear power plants, vastly poisoning the entire oceans of our planet. This is a time of reckoning. This is a time of judgment. This is a time that the prophecies of the indigenous people of Turtle Island have forecast. This is the moment. And this is the eschaton. It is time for people to wake up. It is time for people to change. They have to translate their pathetic whining over the past into change in the present time. That's the message that Phil is bringing. That's the message that Ubiquity is bringing, trying to raise the consciousness of our people to help save our human family. That's what has to happen here. That's the word.
Aho.
Oh, Danny, thank you. That was powerful and focused on what needs to now happen. We're in the eschaton. We are in the end of time. And that's what Code Red for Humanity means. And the wounding of our native peoples is at the root of the cataclysm that we're bringing down upon ourselves. So thank you for that very powerfully. And I'd like to have both of you back in a moment here, but I want to turn to Natalya Weaselhead, who has been participating this as a participant. And so, Rick, I wonder if you could promote her so that she could just bear witness in her own way, from her own story, in a brief way, what it is that she experienced. And then we'll have final words from Phil and Danny and Natalya and close out our session. But Rick, can you promote Natalya?
She should be there, Jim. Hold on. There she is.
There she is. Natalya, welcome, and thank you for your willingness spontaneously to share your story with us. Please.
Okay, next o'clock. Ishtu anakok Natalya Weaselhead ki niteki stipimarki. Hello, my relatives. My names are Natalya Weaselhead and One Spot Woman, and I come from the Blackfeet Nation, the Kenai people. And right now I'm greeting you from the original Salish territory in Missoula, Montana. So I'm very grateful for you to kind of have me on so quickly. And I just wanted to share a bit of my background and my experience as a stolen child. I was born in 1984, so I'm just 37 years old, and I was stolen away from my family and my people before I was even born. They had my mother sign papers and give me away. And so I was adopted into a white Mormon family here in Montana. And my name was changed from Selena Weaselhead to Julie Geldrich at that time. And so I was fully colonized and assimilated into the white culture. And it was a pretty regular thing for me to hear racism around me against Native peoples, you know, at the dinner table, and from school, from the other kids, and at church. And so that shame just carried me everywhere, and shame of being who I was and having my own skin. And as a young child, I was sexually abused, and it was covered up. And that was just when I was 8 years old. And I've been called a liar ever since then. And that was their way of keeping that silence and taking my voice from me. And, you know, in church and in home, I was always told, you know, that I had come from a wicked people, and their ways were evil. And we were taught in the church that there were the Lamanites and the Nephites. And the Lamanites were the ones that strayed from God. And the Nephites were the righteous ones who were going to bring them back. And so the Lamanites were the native people, and the Nephites were the white people. And at 12 years old, I was given a very, what I was told was supposed to be a very special blessing in the church that all the children get. And it's supposed to be your direct message from God. And you get your lineage. And at that time, when they gave me my lineage, they told me that I was a descendant of the Lamanite people. And so all of a sudden I had all this information that I had been taught for so many years rushing in, that the Lamanite people were the wicked ones, and that I carried that descendancy inside of me. And I felt so ashamed and felt like I was wicked. And I hated being who I was. And I was never allowed to go to powwow. And I always heard terrible things about my Weaselhead family, just terrible. You know, they're drunks and mean, they're horrible, they were liars, they're lazy, you know, anything you can think of. And so I never heard a good word about them. And as an adult, I really had to work hard to reconnect with my culture, with my people, with my family. And it has not been an easy road, but I started to hear really beautiful things about my family, about my Weaselhead family. Really beautiful stories from elders that I began to meet, and people that knew my Weaselhead family. And they would tell me these stories that were filled with honor. They were filled with humor. They made me laugh, and they made me want to know them. And I slowly started to realize just how indoctrined I had been with all these terrible lies for so many years. And I ended up going to a documentary on John Trudell. And at the end, they asked the newcomers to introduce themselves, and I awkwardly introduced myself because it was really difficult being around natives and saying, my name is Julie Geldrich. And so I awkwardly introduced myself. I'm Julie Geldrich, but I was born as Selena Weaselhead, and, you know, didn't really know what to say. And one of the elders in the back stood up and called attention and said, we must listen to her. This one, she comes from chiefs. And I was so struck and so thrown off guard. You know, you don't have to listen. I don't have much to say. But I started talking to this elder afterwards. And, you know, he had asked me what residential school I went to. And there was another kind of area where I felt this disconnect. I would tell myself I was a spoiled Indian because I didn't go through residential school, and that I had it good. And I explained to him that I didn't go to residential school, that I was adopted into a white family, a white Mormon family, and kind of gave a little bit of my story to him. And he said, oh, your whole life was a residential school. And that stuck with me. That stuck with me. So I didn't realize what had happened to me. And I started to be able to have the opportunity to go to ceremony and to reconnect with my culture. And started going to Sweat Lodge and learning teachings. And currently my path, this journey has really brought me to a beautiful place of peace. And I drifted away from my white family last year. Actually, I walked away from my white family and their abuse, and their oppressive attitudes towards me as an individual and me as a Native woman. And I took back my Weaselhead name and I chose Natalya Weaselhead. And I began to learn my language, learn the histories, meet my family, listen to stories. And this last summer, was the first opportunity that I had to attend a Sundance, what our people call Akokatsin, big circle camp. And I was invited there by the leader of the Horn Society and guided through making my vows so that I could dance with the sacred horns bundle. And while I was there, I was really, really very nervous to go because I didn't really know anybody that was going to be there. And when I got there, the elders heard just a little bit about my story, that I was reconnecting with my people. And they said, "You have relatives here. You have relatives here." Oh, I was so surprised. And so they made a point to reconnect me. And I met my Uncle Raymond Many Bears. And he sat with me and listened to my story. And we just had this deep connection that was so, so beautiful. And I had my face painted and I danced with the horns. My uncle gave me my Indian name, Niteki Stipimaki, One Spot Woman. And he named me One Spot Woman after one of our famous leaders, Chief One Spot. When he got up during the naming ceremony, he told my story to the people, and he told the story of Chief One Spot. And I was worried then too, because usually in a naming ceremony, they have your supporters stand behind you and your family. And I saw so many people and their large families. And I thought that I would get up there and not have anyone behind me. And my family started coming up through the crowd. I had a whole group of my family standing behind me. And I had beautiful, powerful matriarchs and my cousins, my aunties, all standing behind me. And as my uncle told my story to our people that were all standing around us in a circle, this big circle of our whole community. One of my aunties whispered in my ear, "You're a powerful woman now." And I heard them all behind me for the first time in my life. My family telling me, "I love you. I love you." And that was all taken from me. That had been taken from me from my entire life. I had never had that love. and that support. My language was taken, my way of life, my people, my community, my family, love was taken from me. And I had never experienced that before. Being lifted up in that way, being seen in that way, and honored in that way. So when we say all of these things that were taken from us, this is what it means. This is the depth of what that is, that goes down to our hearts, to our sinew, the sinew inside of us. And it's such a difficult road to reconnect. And I saw in the chat, someone said, where do we begin? And I asked myself that same question. Where do I even begin? And it starts with our communities. It starts with our communities lifting us up, seeing us. And we have such grief, overwhelming grief through our nations right now at this discovery of things that were already known. You know, our people already knew that our children were stolen, that our children were raped and beaten and terrorized and tortured and killed and buried with unmarked graves. We already knew that. Our elders lived with it daily. It's just the world is seeing it now. And that pain and that grief that everyone is feeling, you know, it doesn't have, we can lift them out of the earth and we can bring them home. But there are still us children out here who are taken, who are stolen, and who are lost and wandering and hurt in our hearts and our spirits. And we're out here. We need to be seen and lifted, and that will bring healing. We can't hold those children that were stolen and murdered, but our people can hold us still. And our bonds with our families have been broken. And the bonds that we would have had and should have had have been taken. And it's difficult to regain those bonds. It's really a difficult thing, you know, to meet your family and try to make those strong connections, because those should have been made growing up with your cousins, with your brothers and your sisters and your aunties and your uncles and your parents. You know, I have 2 mothers in this world. I have 2 fathers in this world, but I don't have motherly love. I don't have fatherly love. I don't know how many brothers and sisters and cousins I have. I have a large family. My uncle Raymond told me that if just our Weaselhead family was to put up a circle camp, that we would have 80 to 90 lodges with at least 7 people in each lodge. That's how big our family is. That's how many people I lost. And making bonds with them has been difficult. And so we need support. And we need opportunities and family wellness programs where we can go with our families and we can bond and we can share stories, where we can be taught by our elders, our history, our stories, our language, where we can hear our elders speak the language and we can speak to them and we can learn and we can ask those childish questions that we would have asked as children. Because so many times I say I feel childish asking these things, but I feel that way because those are things that I would have said as a child. And it's okay. We need a place where we can learn to dance and sing. We can learn how to make our regalia. And I've never had regalia. I've never had any of those things. And that hurts. It hurts sometimes when I see jingle dancers. It hurts inside, but I know that they're dancing for me. And that soothes me and it brings me peace and love. And I'm so thankful that they've been dancing for me. And I'm so thankful for my ancestors. My ancestors, they guided me back. I have strong connection with my ancestors. And Uncle Phil, I was really happy to hear you bring up that the crows surrounding you, because the crow relatives have been so close to me. And I have these crow feathers in my hat here, and they're like my brothers and my sisters. And that made me, just filled my heart to hear those surrounding you. But we need our relatives surrounding us and lifting us up in this good way. And I'm so thankful to be able to be here with you all, to be able to have this space, this impromptu space to share my story and my experiences. And thank you to Humanity Rising and to our beloved Uncle Phil and everyone else here.
Thank you, Natalya. That's maybe one of the most powerful statements we've had since we started Humanity Rising. I just want to salute you for your courage and your purity of heart and your deep, deep compassion for all of us as we struggle to create a better world. So thank you. As we bring this session to a close, I want to just have final statements. I'd like a final statement from you, Danny, and then Phil, if you would say something, and then Natalya, I'd like you to have a final word today, just to close us out of a very, very powerful session of hard truth, but deep love and great hope. Danny?
Oh, the way that we can process this whole thing is to all get back to work. Back to work at bringing about the change that is necessary to move from this place of hurt, this place of hope, and get back to work to stop the global climate change, but in the process transform this into an opportunity to bring into fruition the vision of the people, not in the total collapse of human civilization, but in the rebirth.
Thank you. Phil?
Mitakiapi, beloved Toja, Natayo. I'm so pleased, so pleased. Your great-grandfather, Pat Weaselhead, Mokaki, I believe is his name in Blackfoot, came to sit when we had this Chiapi ceremony with my daughter, Deloria, who I'm looking for you to meet. Deloria, Many Gray Horses, Many Gray Horses. He came and prayed for her. So I know him. Such a fine relatives. Such fine relatives like him. So just thank you so much. And it reminded me of the 60 Scoop, that whole 60 Scoop across Canada. In the 1960s, by the way, they came and took thousands of our children, thousands of our children, because of the hurt and pain in our communities. Of course, they think, and brought them in. The same thing happened. Sexually abused, raped by various people who call themselves Christians, of many different Christians groups. As I said, I call it churchianity. Churchianity had nothing to do with a with what the teachings of Jesus are about. But I want to say this. You know, our prophecies across the Americas foretold this great winter time that would come. Although we didn't know what it was, we knew it would be a great winter time, but we knew we would emerge. At that time, and people who are just beginning to get this, we were over 100 million, at least, Indigenous people living across the Americas. Now scholars are saying 108 million. Even it was 90 million. Now we're back to 78 million. And on June 20th, 2020, during World Unity Week, we had a whole day gathering the work we've been doing. And at 5:44 p.m. on that date, Pacific Standard Time, the union of the Condor, the Quetzal, and the Eagle was formed. We are now building a digital backbone to rise up, the largest digital nation upon Mother Earth. We are going to build the alternative. The other system's sick. And the way to build it, like they told us, the elders said, stand in your spiritual strength. Focus on the positive alternative you wish to create without giving your energy away fighting the negative. So if you want to be involved in fighting in all these partisan politics and all the thing collapses down, fine. That's your choice and that's your consequences. So what we do, we have consequences. We have free choice. If you want to join a movement of which Equity, Ubiquity University, Jim, so many of us are part of, Sign Network, Unity Earth, so many others, to build, literally build an alternative, to build a new global civilization together, then you can choose that way. It's up to you. The choice is yours. You want to go down for the tube, or you want to begin listening to what our beautiful Indigenous elders, who I turn to and look to. I'm just kind of a young guy along the way too, you know, compared. We're on an eternal journey here. So let's get the thing fixed up. And I thank you so much, Daniel. Thank you. I know you now because I knew all those relatives there at Wounded Knee when you were there, Russell. In fact, Russell's a cousin of mine through this White Buffalo prophecy. That's my mother's from Yankton. So all those relatives that are in the spiritual world are still here with us. So thank you again for everybody. Have a beautiful day. Aho.
Aho. Thank you, Phil. And thank you, everyone, for this session. And now let's close by listening to Natalya, just giving us whatever final thought or blessing, Natalya, that you would like to share with us as we share with you your journey and Phil's journey and Danny's journey and the journey of all the people that have endured what you have endured and emerged strong like a phoenix out of the ashes of beauty and heartfulness and courage and deep, deep wisdom. We honor you today.
Thank you. Thank you for that. That's so beautiful. And I feel that honoring from you all here in this space. I am just so heartened. My heart is so filled to hear all your testimonies and to hear this beautiful knowledge being raised in this light of awareness to our consciousness as collective human relatives. We made a promise as human relatives to protect the sacred. And this is all a part of that. And I pray today that Creator is compassionate on us on this journey. Gimato nishtu opagasan. Be compassionate on us children. And I pray that all this beautiful, beautiful compassion and knowledge and heart and our stories can guide us to a better way of life, a better way of walking. So thank you so much. Thank you so much for having me here.
Oh. Thank you, everyone. This has been a very powerful illumination of deep, hard truth and great hope and courage for the future. Bye for now. We'll see you again on Monday, same time, same station, for Humanity Rising.